Also, public satisfaction with the NHS is at its lowest level in 25 years. We'll be speaking to a former health secretary on what needs to be done to improve the NHS. And we'll be getting the latest from Ukraine, where Russia has relocated forces away from Kyiv to focus on its capture of the Donbass region. But can Vladimir Putin be trusted? We're also going to be live in the Commons at 3, where the Prime Minister is going to face questions from MPs ahead of the Easter recess. You will not want to miss that. And always do get in touch with your views. You can email me at gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at GBNews. A hell of a lot coming up between now and 4 o'clock. But first, at the top of the hour, is the news.
Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 2. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. Repeated failures led to the deaths of 201 babies and 9 mothers at an NHS trust, with a damning report finding catastrophic errors were made over a 20-year period. The independent inquiry says they could or would have survived if the Shrewsbury and Telford Hospital NHS Trust had provided better care. Other babies suffered skull fractures and were left severely brain damaged. The head of the inquiry, Donna Ockenden, was highly critical of the trust, saying it didn't learn from its own inadequate investigations.
We now know that this is a trust that failed to investigate, failed to learn, and failed to improve. This resulted in tragedies and life-changing incidents for so many of our families. The review team is particularly concerned by the lack of transparency internally within the trust, as well as the lack of honesty and transparency shown to families.
Reverend Charlotte Cheshire's son suffered life-changing injuries after a traumatic birth.
My son will never live the life that he might otherwise have had, and the images that my late husband saw in intensive care that day literally haunted him with nightmares until the day he died in 2020. That is not the experience of becoming a parent that any parent should have, but that's what we live with.
Well, Health Secretary Sajid Javid says the failures highlighted in the report have no place in the NHS.
To all the families that have suffered so greatly, I am sorry. The report clearly shows that you were failed by a service that was there to help you and your loved ones to bring life into this world. We will make the changes that the report says are needed at both a local and national level.
Justice Secretary Dominic Raab says he'll appeal a parole board decision to release the mother of baby P from prison. Tracy Connolly was jailed in 2009 for causing or allowing the death of her 17-month-old son Peter at their home in North London. He'd suffered more than 50 injuries, despite being on the at-risk register. The parole board cited Connolly's progress whilst in custody and time on licence as reasons for the decision. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has accused the Prime Minister of breaking the ministerial code and lying about the Downing Street parties. That's after the Met Police found coronavirus laws were broken during lockdown, resulting in 20 fixed penalty notices. Number 10 maintains Boris Johnson didn't mislead Parliament when he claimed the rules were followed. During Prime Minister's questions, the Labour leader asked when he was going to step down.
He told the House no rules were broken in Downing Street during lockdown. Yeah. The police have now concluded there was widespread criminality. Yeah. The ministerial code says that ministers who knowingly mislead the House should resign. Yeah. Why is he still here? Yeah.
Well, Boris Johnson criticised Sir Keir for being inconsistent in his views.
You do at least expect some consistency from this human weather vane. It was only a week or so ago where he was saying that I shouldn't resign. He's got to make what is his position, Mr. Speaker? Investigators must get on with their job, but in the meantime, In the meantime, Mr. Speaker, we are going to get on with our job, and what we are focusing on is tackling the cost of living, helping people.
Well, the Prime Minister has also praised a Conservative MP who has come out as trans, saying his story will undoubtedly support others. MP for Bridgend and Porthcawl, Jamie Wallis, posted a personal statement online saying a blackmailer, who's since been jailed, outed him to his family. Mr Wallis also said he was raped last year by a man he met online and that he's been diagnosed with gender dysphoria. Boris Johnson says the UK needs to double down on military aid to Ukraine and avoid backsliding on sanctions against Russia. The Prime Minister's committing another 6,000 missiles to Kiev. It says a Ukrainian peace negotiator in Istanbul stay on to discuss military technical cooperation with Turkey. More than 50,000 spectators have paid tribute to cricketer Shane Warne at a state memorial service in Melbourne. Performances were given by Sir Elton John and Coldplay's Chris Martin, and tributes came from his children, former teammates and fans. Considered one of the greatest leg spinners of all time, he died aged 52 from a suspected heart attack whilst on holiday in Thailand. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens, of course. Now, though, it's back to Darren.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes, hello and welcome to the programme. It is 7 minutes past 2 o'clock on this Wednesday afternoon. We're on TV, online and on your radio too. Thank you very much indeed for your company. Lots of politics around today. We're going to start with Prime Minister's Question Time, which was back to its usual boisterous ways, with the Prime Minister acting on the front foot when it came to try and combat the vastly negative reviews, it must be said, of the Chancellor's spring statement. Boris Johnson was very much in a competitive mood today with the Chancellor and with the Chamber, I should say, with many MPs. Let's have a look.
Cut the nonsense and treat the British people with a bit of respect. Let me take him through this slowly. 15 tax rises, the highest tax burden for 70 years. For every £6 they're taking in tax rises, they're only handing £1 back. Prime Minister, is that cutting taxes or is that raising taxes?
Prime Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't know where he's been for the last 2 years. But even by the standards yes, he has. Even by the standards of Captain Hindsight, Mr. Speaker, to obliterate the biggest pandemic for the last century from his memory, to obliterate the $408 billion that we've had to spend to look after people up and down the country is quite extraordinary. And this is a government that is getting on with reducing the tax burden wherever we can. What we are doing, Mr. Speaker, there's one measure I think he should be supporting, and that's the health and care levy, Mr. Speaker, to fund our NHS. That's the one they oppose, Mr. Speaker. Every other tax rise, they're all in favour of.
Combative indeed. The Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, was sitting next to him. He may well be combative, but not in public, certainly behind doors if you listen to news reports over the weekend. Let's move on, though, because there was also focus, of course, on Ukraine, continuing to dominate the news agenda. Seemed to be more optimistic news this week, doesn't it, with Russian forces acknowledging that they've failed, essentially, and that they have got now a zero chance of taking Kyiv. Talks in Istanbul broke up yesterday. That came after Ukraine offered to make itself permanently neutral if the UK and other Western powers and China provided military protection from future Russian aggression. But in more bizarre news, the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, has claimed that Moscow and Beijing are leading the way towards a multipolar, just democratic world order as he makes his first visit to China since Russia invaded Ukraine last month. Though many people, of course, not least the United States, saying that these talks aren't necessarily going terribly far and that you cannot trust Vladimir Putin. One said that this is merely Russian roulette. You do not know what Vladimir Putin may well do next. Of course, many of these assurances have been made in the past, only to be broken. And we'll be talking and be live in Ukraine a little later on in the programme. But let's reflect on all this politics. Delighted to say that we're joined in the studio by two good friends of mine and the channel. We've got the Conservative MP, Michael Fabricant, and the political editor of the Sunday People, Nigel Nelson. Good afternoon to you, gentlemen. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. First of all, let's focus on one of the key stories from PMQs today, Michael, and that was on the cost of living, on the Chancellor's spring statement. It is fair to say it is not just the Labour opposition who want to see the government do more. Many of your colleagues do too.
That's right. I think many of us are very, very aware that the cost of living crisis, and you know the word crisis gets used far too often nowadays, but
this is a proper crisis.
This is a proper crisis. Of course, it's not just affecting the United Kingdom, it's affecting most European countries, the United States too, where inflation is running far higher than that in the UK. But whether enough has been done is the question on everybody's lips, including many Conservative backbenchers. Now, the Prime Minister is quite right to point out that we unexpectedly had to pay out over £400 billion. And if I could make one political point, it would have been a darn sight more than £400 billion if Keir Starmer had been in power, because he wanted to lock down the country for far, far longer. So it would have needed far more money going into the economy from taxation, which wouldn't be available because businesses would be locked down. However, I don't think, to be honest, that we have gone far enough with the spring statement. There will be a budget in the autumn, and I hope that Rishi will think again.
But isn't the problem is that this squeeze is not going to come in the autumn, it's coming now. And I get your point that this is clearly a global phenomenon. There's no doubt, I think inflation today in Germany has hit its highest level since 1981. But we're the only major economy increasing our taxes at precisely the same time.
Yeah, well, that's been said. It's not actually true. The Germans have actually put in a new tax regime, and so is the United States about to do it. It just so happens that we've had the spring statement when we have it. And I've read this in so many newspapers, and with the greatest of respect to Nigel here, he will know, and as an ex-BBC journalist, we all know that one journalist says something, and then we all think, oh, that's a good point, and we repeat it as if it's true. It isn't true. But whether there's international pressure of this kind or not, it certainly is something I think we need to address more in this country, and we're aware of it.
The reports went there, Nigel, at the weekend that this was a train that was about to hit the government, and there was a lack of understanding, some were arguing, inside Number 10 about how serious this all could be. What's your take on this?
Well, I think that it's in Number 11 they've got the same problem. That what was meant to happen last week was a spring statement, and it's exactly that. It was meant to be a statement about the financial health of the nation. It turned into a mini budget because the Chancellor had to actually do something. Then he ended up not only not doing enough, but doing really weird things. So, for instance, that there had been a lot of pressure on him to at least postpone the national insurance rise. So when it comes to tax rises that Michael is talking about, that is the key one. So we're looking at 2.5% up on national insurance, half paid by employers, half by employees. But then he does this strange thing and says, I'll tell you what, I'll take a penny off your income tax as we're going into the next election. Now, that just seemed to be absolutely crazy. Either you decide to reduce taxes now when it really matters, because cost of living crisis hits now, or you wait to make that announcement when the time comes. But you can't possibly know what the state of the finances will be then.
Some might suggest that it was all got to do with the parliamentary timetable, and less about the economic reality.
And you never know, there might be a surprise.
Why do chancellors announce tax cuts 2 years in advance?
Well, exactly. You might be surprised to find out it's a 2p or a 3p cut. Who knows? We'll find out. It was an odd signal, though. Politically, it seemed rather strange to actually announce this thing. And even stranger that maybe Rishi didn't anticipate that the Labour opposition would say, understandably, well, this is blatant electioneering.
OK, let's pause for a time being. I should just bring you up to date with some news that's coming into us, which is in Scotland. and that is that Nicola Sturgeon has announced that the legal requirement to wear face coverings, been a big debate, hasn't it, of course, in Scotland, will be removed on a phase basis from next week, from April 4th, which I think is Monday. It's difficult to keep track of days sometimes. But that is that Scotland is going to remove, on a phase basis, face coverings, the legal requirement for face coverings in some settings from this Monday. Nicola Sturgeon just making that announcement in the Scottish Parliament. Let's stay or go back to PMQs now, because there was another big issue today, the return of Partygate.
Talking of parties, Prime Minister, he told the House no rules were broken in Downing Street during lockdown. The police have now concluded there was widespread criminality. The ministerial code says that ministers who knowingly mislead the House should resign. Why is he still here?
Hang on a minute. He's just changed his position. Sorry, Mr. Speaker. I mean, we do at least expect some consistency from this human weather vane. It was only a week or so ago where he was saying that I shouldn't resign. He's got to make what is his position, Mr. Speaker? The Met must, the investigators must get on with their job. But in the meantime, they should. In the meantime, Mr. Speaker, we are going to get on with our job. And
there we go. That was Prime Minister speaking at PMQs. Afterwards, his official spokesperson still refusing to say that the law has been broken over those Downing Street parties, something the Deputy Prime Minister admitted earlier on today. Has the law been broken, Michael?
Well, first of all, let's just talk about what Keir Starmer said, because Keir Starmer quite rightly quoted and then went on to say something that wasn't consistent, because although Keir Starmer is a lawyer, the person who writes Keir Starmer's questions isn't. He's got to be shown to knowingly have misled the House. Now, I know, talking to the Prime Minister and others, that he did not believe that they... Look, when is a party a party? I know plenty of...
Well, I mean, that looks like one there, doesn't it?
Well, is that a party?
You
must have had a very sheltered life, Darren. I can tell you the sort of parties I go to aren't people sitting demurely around. But let me answer the question.
I think drinking wine and eating cheese...
Before you show that video...
And it's breaking the rules, however you look at that.
Doesn't this boil down to Theresa May's question, your former leader, when she said there are either two things at play here. First of all, Boris Johnson didn't know there were any parties because he didn't understand the rules, the very rules that he imposed on millions of others, or that he did know and he was breaking the law.
Well, first of all, there are 400 people. I mean, people talk about Downing Street. Keir Starmer talked about Downing Street as if it's one office. I mean, there are 400 people who work in the Downing Street complex. There are over 150 separate offices. So the idea that the Prime Minister would know when there's a party or when there isn't is very naive, particularly as one of the parties, at least, was when he was 45 miles away in Chequers. I mean, good God, what does Keir Starmer think that a Prime Minister does? He was at that one, but was that a party, and was that breaking the rules? Now, I know a number of people, a nurse has said to me, look, you know, at the end of a long shift, when we were battling COVID at its height and we were all exhausted, we'd go back to the staff room and just sit down and have a quiet drink. Was that a party? No, I don't think so. And I think it all comes down to the definition of party and whether he was blatant breaking the rules.
The only people who are going to decide that are clearly the Metropolitan Police.
Correct. Yeah.
So the Metropolitan Police decide that he has broken the law and given a fixed penalty fine.
Have they?
No, I said if they do. If they do, isn't that a serious enough matter where the Prime Minister should question whether he remains a number 10?
Well, he may question, but personally, and let's not even talk about hypothetical things, but you know what? Because it's GBNews, I will. Depending on the circumstances of precisely what he was doing, if it was just sitting down after a really busy day, and you know what? Trying to source a vaccine program that led the world. We were the first to have a vaccine program some 4 months ahead of the European Union. And sitting down in the garden, which is all an extension of the office, because it's, as you well know, you've been in that garden, Darren, you know, and having a quiet drink. That photo does not look like a party to me. A party is when people are partying.
Yeah,
They weren't partying.
that is only one incident. We believe there was another, but there is another the Prime Minister admitted being at. We don't have pictures of that possibly yet. Nigel, what's your thoughts?
Well,
I mean, there is a sense, I mean, the Prime Minister is pretty combative today, as I keep saying, but he was. And there is a sense that he's got a lot more headroom. The momentum in this story, clearly because of the awful circumstances in Ukraine, has somewhat ground to a halt.
Yes, and obviously, at the end of the day, people like Keir Starmer or Ed Davey of the Lib Dems can call for Boris Johnson's resignation. He won't resign. They're whistling in the wind for that. It's up to people like Michael to decide whether he should go, and I think he won't on the basis of the Ukraine war. When it comes down to the actual law breaking, at the moment that we know, the police think the law was broken on 20 occasions. The actual fines have yet to arrive on the individuals, and we don't know who they are. Now, unless they appeal those fines, that is an admission that the law has been broken. And at the moment, Number 10 are still not admitting that when it seems to be crystal clear.
Just very finally on this, Michael, I do want to move on. But in the end, I mean, the Prime Minister did say he is the leader. It is his house, as you keep pointing out.
Well, it's big. It's a government building.
Well, he lives there, and I mean, it's big, but it's not that big. This seems to have now happened multiple times. He said back in December that there were no parties and that all the guidance was followed. I mean, at the very least, that is entirely wrong. Shouldn't he have known that?
No, as I say, there are 150 offices in the Downing Street complex. I'm going to take you there. And I'm going to show you where some of the offices are, in attics, in basements, all over the place. The idea that he would know what's going on in 150 separate offices is nonsense. It truly is.
There are reports.
And it's very naive of Keir Starmer to think that
there are reports that maybe one or two of these parties happened inside his own flat, but we'll have to wait and see what the police come and say that. We want to end this on Jamie Wallis, of course, the MP for Bridgend, who today very bravely came out and reflected on the fact that he has got gender dysphoria, that also he's been a victim of rape and blackmail over the last year or so, but that he wants to essentially start a new life in many regards. And this was the reaction at PMQs.
Mr. Speaker, the whole House will have read the statement today from my honourable friend, the member for Bridgend. And I know that the House stands with you and will give you the support that you need to live freely as yourself.
Michael, colleague of yours, what's your response?
Well, I mean, I think the whole situation that he found himself in was desperately sad. I think the courage that he showed to come out on this issue is incredibly brave. I've got his statement here. He posted it at 3 a.m. in the morning. It was after the Conservative Party met for the first time in 3 or 4 years for an away evening. Notice I'm trying to avoid the word party. Yeah, exactly. And that opening paragraph says, you know, we had a parliamentary photo in the chamber, then we went to dinner together, it was nice, and then he said, lovely to speak to colleagues away from Parliament, because, you know, it was a really nice, loving occasion, actually.
What about the Prime Minister's joke at the start that's been reflected upon? In which I'm trying to find it, but essentially he was ribbing, if you like, the Labour leader about his stance on trans issues. Many people felt it was insensitive.
I'm not familiar. When did this happen?
I will get it for you. You carry on.
Today?
I'll find it. No. Before the dinner last night, or the drinks last night.
His speech at the dinner.
I see. I didn't hear because I was sitting so near the back. The acoustics were terrible. So, but you know, we're very, very proud of Jamie. And one of the points he made, which is I thought particularly interesting, actually, was how the whips had been helping him. And the whips had been very supportive. Everyone thinks that the whips, you know, remember there was an incident about 6 or 7 months ago where one of my colleagues said that anybody who's been bullied by the whips should go to the Met Police. And I put out a freedom of information thing with the police commissioner who revealed there had been no complaints whatsoever about the whips. I mean, that was a rather foolish thing to say, but saying actually how supportive and kind the whips had been and helping him. And we're all very, very sincerely proud of him.
For fairness, he said, "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen." This was Boris Johnson last night at that party with Conservative MPs. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," or as Keir Starmer would put it, people who are assigned female or male at birth.
That's not a joke. This is the whole point.
I know, but the whole point is
wouldn't answer questions on LBC. I wish it had been on GBNews, incidentally.
No, but my whole point is that people might find that offensive, and given the context, that Jimmy Wallace faced today.
I don't think it was offensive at all. Okay. I think it was just saying that, as on most things, Keir Starmer wasn't prepared to define anything, even when it came to even trans issues, And this is typical Keir Starmer, but this is not about Keir Starmer. This is about Jamie. And I just think he's been incredibly brave. Look, anybody who knows Boris knows what he used to write years ago, because people have said he's a racist, he's a homophobe. It's absolutely not the case. He is one of the most liberal people. I'm on the left side of the Conservative Party on social issues. I'll be voting for remote abortion later on this afternoon. To maintain it, because we introduced it in COVID. And, I would not be supporting Boris if I thought he was remotely some sort of homophobe, xenophobe, or any other form of homophobe. He's an incredibly liberal person. Some would argue too liberal.
And just very finally, Nigel, we should reflect, shouldn't we, that, this is historic in many regards. He will be the first trans MP.
He'll be the first transgender MP. And what I found today, I thought PMQs was actually very moving, that there was obviously an atmosphere in the House where everybody was actually getting behind him, no matter which party they came from. I thought that was a huge positive.
It was heartwarming.
Okay. Yeah. Gentlemen, as always, for the time being, thank you very much indeed, Nigel and Michael, there. Let's move on now. We're going to talk about the National Health Service, because the British public's satisfaction with the NHS has fallen to its lowest level in a quarter of a century, according to the National Centre for Social Research. More people in England, Scotland and Wales are now dissatisfied with the NHS than are satisfied for the first time since 2002. Discontent then led to Tony Blair's Labour government raising taxes to improve the service and introducing targets to ensure a speedy care. The collapse has been further driven, of course, by long waiting times and all main types of NHS care, with persistent staff shortages and a widespread belief that the government has denied it the funding it needs, though, of course, NHS spending has been protected even during the years of austerity. Joining me now to discuss all of this from Central London is the former Secretary of State for Health, Stephen Dorrell. And I read today, Stephen, in many regards, these are the lowest levels since 1997, when you were the Health Secretary. Is there any parallels we can draw between now and then?
Well, I think many of the same issues, in truth, have come back that I was dealing with a quarter of a century ago. In particular, obviously, waiting times for planned care. Now, we all know that this is in part the result of the lockdown process and the implications of the pandemic. It doesn't alter the fact that as we look forward beyond the pandemic, it's a huge challenge for the health service to address the waiting times for people who've been put on waiting lists and who have not had access to their care. And there's an additional factor, which is the result of the pandemic, which we didn't have actually in the 1990s, which is that not only are there a huge number of people on waiting lists, but there's also people who haven't been to see their GP, who haven't been put on waiting lists. So it's almost a hidden demand that I fear is actually, I think almost all observers of the health service recognise that the waiting list understates the number of people who, in truth, are waiting for NHS care. So it's a huge issue for the health service.
Is this purely about the pandemic, though, Stephen, and all the ramifications that you've explained just then? Or are there other factors at play here about why people have growing dissatisfaction?
I think it's the pandemic. First of all, I think it is important to make the point that although people are increasingly dissatisfied with individual aspects of the service delivered by the NHS.
Unfortunately, we've just lost Stephen Dorrell there, talking about public support for the National Health Service. We know that it's down in many regards. Hoping to talk about the fact, what is the way out of that to a large degree? Is it increased spending, given the fact that obviously NHS spending is increasing and has been increasing for the last decade or so, and taking up an increasing amount of the government's overall budget. Let's bring back Stephen in. We just lost him there for a second. Apologies, Stephen. Just carry on about the other factors that might be at play here.
Well, I think the point I was trying to make, I'm sorry if we were cut off, is that although people are concerned about the waiting times, and they have every reason to be concerned about waiting times, one of the learnings of the pandemic was, of course, the huge public support for the NHS, for the principles of the NHS. But one of the other aspects, if you look beyond the hospital service, that I think has become increasingly a matter of concern in recent years, this is not just during the pandemic period, is the ability of people to get access to out-of-hospital services. And quite often this is said to be GP services, but actually what we need to have is more joined-up services, including in social care, but also in out-of-hospital services, in order that people don't go to hospital, they don't find themselves waiting to get into hospital in urgent for A&E departments as well as for planned care, unless that's really necessary. And what the health service is seeking to do is to take resources and deliver more preventive services and earlier intervention to avoid people going to hospital when they don't need to.
And just very finally, Stephen, I mean, many people would say the solution to all of this, of course, is to chuck more money at it. NHS spending has been pretty protected. We're getting to a stage now where the NHS budget is so large on the government pie of spending, and there seems to be no end in sight, in the sense that we have got an ageing population.
Well, it's absolutely true that over a prolonged period, governments of all complexions have devoted a rising share of our national income to the health and care system, reflecting, as you rightly say, the increasing demand from a growing elderly population, and also, of course, things that medicine can do and care can support, that services can provide, that wasn't possible a generation ago. So that, yes, there is an increasing spending profile. I don't personally believe that's wrong. Indeed, quite the contrary. I'm in favour of that growing expenditure. But what we need to do is to ensure that we change the health and care system, make it more joined up in order to get better value, both for the taxpayer who pays for this, and also, most important of all, for the people who rely on these services.
OK, thank you very much for your analysis, Stephen. Stephen Dorrell there, the former Secretary of State for Health, joined us from central London. You're watching GB News, just after 2:30. Here's the news.
Good afternoon, it's 2:32. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. Repeated failures led to the deaths of 201 babies and 9 mothers at Shrewsbury and Telford Hospital NHS Trust, with a damning report finding they could have survived if they were given better care. Catastrophic errors were made over a 20-year period, with other babies being left severely brain damaged. The head of the inquiry, Donna Ockenden, says the Trust didn't learn from its own inadequate investigations.
We now know that this is a trust that failed to investigate, failed to learn, and failed to improve. This resulted in tragedies and life-changing incidents for so many of our families.
Justice Secretary Dominic Raab says he'll appeal a parole board decision to release the mother of baby P from prison. Tracy Connolly was jailed in 2009 for causing or allowing the death of her 17-month-old son Peter at their home in North London. He'd suffered more than 50 injuries, despite being on the at-risk register. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has accused the Prime Minister of breaking the ministerial code and lying about the Downing Street parties. That's after the Met Police found coronavirus laws were broken during lockdown and issued 20 fixed penalty notices. Number 10 maintains Boris Johnson did not mislead Parliament. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. The briefing with Darren will be back in just a moment.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
A very welcome back to GB News. It is 23 minutes to 3 o'clock. You're watching us online, on TV and on your radio, maybe indeed on YouTube too. Thank you for your company. Don't forget, we're going to be hearing from the Prime Minister in around 20 minutes' time. He's addressing or being questioned by some of the most senior MPs in Parliament in front of the Liaison Committee before the Easter recess. We'll bring you that live at around 3 o'clock when it's expected. Lots of you also getting in touch, gbviews at gbnews.uk. Ivor says, this is quoting Keir Starmer, cut the nonsense and treat the British people with respect, says the man who's not willing to state whether a woman can have a penis. John says, not Partygate still. Please move on. It is tedious and irrelevant. There's the potential of a third world war in the background. A lot of people are struggling to survive. And you are talking about Partygate. Pete says, I wonder if all the fixed penalty notice fines will be claimed against expenses. Aidan says, does Starmer's definition of party include his £500,000 he's taken for the Chinese Communist Party? And Alan says the only people who keep pushing this Partygate rubbish are the media and the politicians. The majority of people couldn't care less. Always get in touch, gbviews at gbnews.uk, whether you care or not. And we'll get to some of those a little later on in the programme. Let's move on, though, and back to our top story today. And it's been called the worst maternity scandal in the history of the National Health Service. A long-awaited report into harm caused to babies and mothers at Shrewsbury and Telford Hospital NHS Trusts has found that more than 200 babies may have died and others injured because of failings at that trust. The inquiry was initially set up in 2017 to look into the cases of 23 families, but that grew to nearly 1,600 cases, covering a period of nearly 2 decades. GB News' Midlands reporter Bhavinder Sidhu has been speaking to mothers from Telford who've been sharing their stories.
Hours after Olivia was born, she died in her mum Julie's arms. 20 years later, Julie looks back and says she didn't realise her daughter was not going to survive.
If they'd have been honest with me from the start that she wasn't going to make it, I'd have spent all that time with it, but I didn't. I wasn't even half an hour, not even half an hour holding it.
It was May 2002 when Julie went into labour at the Royal Shrewsbury Hospital. What should have been a straightforward delivery turned into a nightmare. Olivia was in the wrong position and the doctor wanted to move her using a suction cup. But when that failed, he used forceps.
He was supposed to then take me straight to section. He didn't. He went in with the forceps twice. The first time he went in with the forceps, they came off with a clang, and then he went straight back in again. And when he went in again, my husband had me under the arms, pulling me up the bed, because I was being pulled down the bed with the forceps.
Mistakes were made and Olivia was born brain damaged with severe bruising and swelling.
She was perfectly healthy right up until then. And she just, they told me if she had survived, she would never have known who I was.
The doctor who delivered Olivia was later charged but cleared of manslaughter by gross negligence. Julie is now part of an independent inquiry investigating the maternity experiences of more than 1,500 families at the Royal Shrewsbury and Telford NHS Trust.
Olivia will forever now just be a statistic of the failings of this trust. That's going to be hard for me, because how can someone not be responsible?
Pippa Cartwright is helping her 15-year-old son, Louis, get dressed. Louis was born with Erb's palsy. He can't feel or use his right arm. Pippa says when he was born, she was supposed to have a C-section.
I was prepped to have a C-section, but then I was told that they'd done their quota for the day, so I couldn't have a C-section. I remember being in labour. I was violently sick and I got told off by the midwife because I'd been sick on the floor. Then it was all panic stations. I remember my legs being flung back and a midwife sitting on my stomach and pressing down, and I remember the doctor had his foot on the end of the bed and he had Louis' head between his hands, and he was pulling me down the bed and the midwife was pulling me back up the bed. And then obviously Louis was born and obviously he had a severe injury.
And how did you feel?
Angry. Yeah, very angry. It took a few years for me to, because I felt guilty because of the injury that Louis got. I thought it was my fault for years. I blamed myself.
Louis has had to have 22 operations. This injury has changed his life.
Can't play football no more, properly anyway. Can't do things I want like basketball and that. Difficult to get jobs. Showering's even difficult.
The full extent of failings in maternity care at Shrewsbury and Telford NHS Trust will be revealed in a report today. Balvinder Sidhu for GB News.
I'd say that Balvinder joins us now live from Shrewsbury. Balvinder, this is an incredibly shocking report. There is no doubt about that. And there clearly is, understandably, a large level of anger in Shrewsbury.
Yes, Darren, I mean, those were just two of the families that we just heard from now. This review has investigated the claims of up to 1,500 families over 5 years. And the findings of this report are damning indeed. I mean, they found that more than 200 babies and 9 mothers could have survived had they received better maternity care at the Shrewsbury and Telford NHS Trust. Babies were stillborn, severely brain damaged, cerebral palsy. Mothers were left with life-changing medical conditions, and this spanned over a period of almost 2 decades, from 2000 to 2019. Well, why did this happen? Well, there was a culture of not giving women caesarean sections when that was the safest and better option. They were encouraged more to go for normal vaginal delivery. There was not enough staff, not enough training. Families were not listened to. When things were going wrong, they were not properly investigated or looked into. So Donna Ockenden, who is the senior midwife who led this review, said things were not investigated, lessons weren't learnt, and nothing ever changed. So this story continued, and more families have been affected. So there were several missed opportunities. Between the period of 2011 and 2019, 40% of stillbirths and 43% of neonatal deaths were never investigated. Had they been investigated, the Trust could have made the necessary changes needed for improvements. Families weren't listened to, instead they were blamed. We spoke to some of the families following the report today, and this is what they had to say.
All I ever wanted was somebody to say, I am sorry, I made the mistake, and I will retrain and I will learn from my mistakes, and I never want this to happen again. That's all I ever wanted. I don't believe in people constantly losing their jobs because you make a mistake. Mistakes happen, we're human, but they have to learn from those mistakes.
My son will never live the life that he might otherwise have had. And the images that my late husband saw in intensive care that day literally haunted him with nightmares until the day he died in 2020. That is not the experience of becoming a parent that any parent should have, but that's what we live with.
So this report has now recommended that the Trust make 60 changes to their practices immediately. Donna Ockenden is also calling for a systematic change to midwifery services, not just locally here in Shrewsbury, but nationally. And she has made 15 points of action, which include things like improving staff training, better staffing levels, more funding. In response, the Trust have said, the Chief Executive of the Trust, Louise Barnett, has said that this report is deeply distressing. They have apologised for the pain and distress caused, and they take full responsibility for our failings as a Trust. And they're saying, moving forward, they've delivered all the actions following the interim report, which was released in 2020, and they owe the families that have been already failed and the care for the families, the care for the families with them today, that they make and continue to make improvements.
Balvinda, thank you very much indeed for that. Balvinda Sidhu there joining us from Shrewsbury. Nigel Nelson still with us from the Sunday People in the studio. The scale of this is simply incredible.
It is incredible, and it is absolutely devastating. And it is good that Sajid Javid has accepted all the recommendations that Donna Ockenden has put forward. The only one that I found when he was making a statement in Parliament, the only one I found a bit worrying is that one of the things that will happen now is all hospitals will assess their maternity units. That feels a bit like marking your own homework. I think what you need is an outside independent body to come in and look at maternity units in all hospitals to make sure lessons have been learned.
OK, Nigel, thank you for that. Let's move on to Ukraine now, because we had talks, of course, yesterday in Turkey, didn't we, between both sides, suggestions that progress would be made. We've heard from the Russians as well, saying that they are essentially moving away from Kyiv, the capital, focusing much more on the Donbass region, giving some breathing space, they argue, to those negotiations. But the United States and others are saying that in the end they don't believe any progress is going to be made at this, and that President Putin cannot be trusted. Where do we stand on this? Nigel Nelson still with us in the studio. This is really difficult, complex stuff. But frankly, if you listen to the Brits and the Americans, they're saying we cannot trust Putin.
That's right. What they're saying is, let's see what the actions are rather than the words. And so there's now a row today about whether or not troops have been withdrawn from Kiev or they're just regrouping. So we still don't know quite what is happening there. I do think there's some very positive signs from the Ukrainians. I mean, if they are talking about their own neutrality, talking about the idea that they won't join NATO, all these are positives for a way forward. Doesn't mean we'll get peace. I can't see how Putin could dare to lose this war, having decided to go into it. But there's a glimmer of hope at the moment.
OK, well, let's bring in Mircea Babu. He is a journalist, a Ukrainian journalist. He's been currently in Romania, on the border there with Ukraine. Thank you so much for joining us. Just first of all, what is your sense of how these talks have progressed? Do you think there is the potential of a deal?
Well, what I can tell you is that the place I'm at the Romanian border right now is packed with aid. Just behind me, you can see a warehouse where international aid is making its way down into Romania and then onwards across the border just miles from here. So as long as this aid keeps pouring in, my impression is that there's a huge need on the other side of the border in Ukraine for it, which means that the conflict or the perception of people of this conflict is that it's going to last a long time. People are asking for long-term humanitarian assistance, and that is what they're getting right behind me, as you can see. So I'm very skeptical in terms of an immediate or a quick outcome, a peaceful outcome of this conflict, whether that's days, weeks, or months. People I spoke with on both sides of the border, both here in Romania, but in the previous days on the Ukrainian side, are very doubtful that peace will be obtained through negotiations in Istanbul. Ukrainians, on one hand, are very, very optimistical that they will win the war. They're riding an emotional wave of optimism. And on the other hand, Russians seems not willing to give up the invasion of Ukraine. And even a pullback on Kiev seems very unlikely at the moment.
And just in regards to a compromise, that means obviously Ukrainians compromising as well. Do you think ordinary people are prepared to give things up if it does mean an end to the fighting? Give up land, for example?
Absolutely not. I mean, I spoke with obviously the civil defense units, the so-called TROs in Ukraine. These are people who have little or sometimes no military training, but they decided to join the armed struggle and put up a resistance against the Russian army. And from small villages to all the way up to Kiev, I've had yet to meet a person saying, I'm willing to give up my house, I'm willing to give up my village, my town, whatever we have, just for peace to be obtained. No, they are willing to defend, on the contrary, they are willing to defend every inch of Ukraine, and they are willing to sacrifice those lives. At least that's what they're telling us. At least that's what they're showing us on the ground every time I get a chance to speak with them in Ukraine.
Fascinating stuff. Stay safe as always. And we see that significant amount of aid travelling across the border there. Mircea Babu, join us on the Ukrainian-Romanian border. Thank you very much indeed for joining us here on GB News. OK, we're going to take a quick break here on GB News. Coming up in just a couple of minutes' time, we're going to be live in Parliament, where the Prime Minister is facing questions from some of Parliament's most senior MPs. We'll be taking the Liaison Committee live. That's after we bring you up to date with the very latest weather across the country, and it is getting cold everywhere.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows. Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Oh, there we go. I promised you before the break I was going to read you the weather, and I didn't, just to say that it's going to be pretty cold, but there is a weather warning also in place for parts of Scotland and northern England, with snow and hail expected from 8 p.m. Tonight until 10 a.m. on Thursday. We'll have a full weather update later on in the programme. Let's move on now, before we hear from the Prime Minister, though, to the cost of living crisis, because we know that we've got energy prices going up. We know that the cost of food in your supermarket basket is also going up, and we know the amount of tax you're likely to pay next month is also likely to go up. It is something that is going to be put front and centre, I suspect, to the Prime Minister when we hear from him in just a couple of minutes' time, live here on GB News in the Commons. But first, before we do, let's speak to the Head of Lifestyle Economics at the Institute of Economic Affairs. That's Christopher Snowden, who joins us down the line from central London. Christopher, thank you for joining us. Just first of all, this is a big political issue, isn't it? I think it was put at the weekend, it's a train that is about to hit the government, and there's a sense across the board that the government needs to do more.
It's a train that's going to hit pretty much the entire world, and there'll be a lot of countries who are worse off than the UK will be as a result of this. There's not actually a great deal that the government can do without potentially making things worse. These are just the consequences of actions. Principally, two things. Firstly, the whole COVID pandemic, the lockdowns, the furlough, the cash grants, printing a whole lot of money, vast sums of money to pay people to do nothing. And whatever the vices or virtues of that was always going to come with a bill attached. And now we have the war in Ukraine and the sanctions. So they're not two events that I necessarily think people would try and turn the clock back on. I think it's probably right that we have sanctions on Russia, but again, it comes with a bill attached. And so there isn't a huge amount the government can do. There will be calls, of course. There are calls for the government to borrow more money to try and help people out, but really you're just making the issue worse in the short to medium term, indeed the long term, because you're putting more printed money, essentially, onto an inflationary economy. That is a recipe for more inflation and worse cost of living problems. So I'm afraid people are just going to have to bite the bullet.
Yeah, in saying that, some suggesting, though, that actually we should treat the kind of COVID debt, if you like, a bit like we did with the war debt and spread it out over decades and decades, and that there should be less focus on kind of borrowing.
Well, we're in 2.3 trillion pounds of debt at the moment. We've been doing this for quite some time. There seems like there's always a crisis to justify more government borrowing and more money printing. We had the financial crisis in 2008. Then there was a cost of living crisis in the early part of the 2010s, if you remember, and people say we need to borrow more money in order to avoid a recession. Then we had Brexit and the pound plunge, and we said we need to borrow more money to avoid recession. Then we had COVID, and we need to borrow more money to avoid recession. And now we've got war in Ukraine, and what are, in fact, largely worldwide price increases on things like gas and wheat, and people saying we need to borrow more money. This is clearly not a sustainable strategy. Yes, you can borrow more money, but the OBR only last week said that debt interest payments have gone up by £83 billion. There is no such thing as a free lunch, I'm afraid. At some point, you need to try and bring it to an end. It's not as if we're not borrowing anything this year as it is. How much more money do people think we can borrow?
And just finally, if you could, in 30 seconds, is the cold, hard reality here, as we've seen in the past, the only way to get out of this inflation spike is unfortunately with a recession?
The way to get out of the inflationary strike is through economic growth, actually. That's the only thing that can save us. It's what we've needed all along. We've had very poor economic growth for the last 15 years. We know the way to achieve economic growth. You want low taxes and less regulation. The government doesn't seem to want to do that. It has more regulation all the time. To give you one brief example, it's bringing in a ban on buy one, get one free food products in October when inflation is due to spike. These are the real priorities, apparently, of government, not the cost of living.
OK, Christopher, as always, in Shoreham by the Sea rather than central London. Much nicer. Very jealous of you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this afternoon here on GB News. OK, that is it for this hour. We're going to be back, though, in just a couple of minutes. We're going to be live in Parliament where the Prime Minister is facing MPs, senior MPs, where he's going to be questioned about that cost of living crisis, the war in Ukraine, possibly even Partygate 2. Promises to be blockbuster stuff. We'll take that full live coverage in the next couple of minutes. But first, at the top of the hour at 3 o'clock. Here's the latest news. Well, very good afternoon. Welcome to the programme. Let's bring you up to date, as I say, with the latest news. Let's get over to Tasman.
Darren, thank you. It's 3 o'clock. Here are the latest headlines from the GB newsroom. Repeated failures led to the deaths of 201 babies and 9 mothers at an NHS trust, with a damning report finding catastrophic errors were made over a 20-year period. The independent inquiry says they could or would have survived if the Shrewsbury and Telford Hospital NHS Trust had provided better care. Other babies suffered skull fractures and were left severely brain damaged. The head of the inquiry, Donna Ockenden, was highly critical of the trust, saying it didn't learn from its own inadequate investigations.
We now know that this is a trust that failed to investigate, failed to learn, and failed to improve. This resulted in tragedies and life-changing incidents for so many of our families. The review team is particularly concerned by the lack of transparency internally within the trust, as well as the lack of honesty and transparency shown to families.
Reverend Charlotte Cheshire's son suffered life-changing injuries after a traumatic birth.
My son will never live the life that he might otherwise have had, and the images that my late husband saw in intensive care that day literally haunted him with nightmares until the day he died in 2020. That is not the experience of becoming a parent that any parent should have, but that's what we live with.
Well, Health Secretary Sajid Javid says the failures highlighted in the report have no place in the NHS.
To all the families that have suffered so greatly, I am sorry. The report clearly shows that you were failed by a service that was there to help you and your loved ones to bring life into this world. We will make the changes that the report says are needed at both a local and national level.
Justice Secretary Dominic Raab says he'll appeal a parole board decision to release the mother of baby P from prison. Tracy Connolly was jailed in 2009 for causing or allowing the death of her 17-month-old son Peter at their home in North London. He'd suffered more than 50 injuries despite being on the at-risk register. The parole board cited Connolly's progress whilst in custody and time on licence as reasons for the decision. Well, let's just interrupt the bulletin now and go live to the Liaison Committee, where I think we're going to be hearing from Boris Johnson.
It would be wrong of me to deviate from that.
Prime Minister, we're not expecting you to give any commentary, quite obviously, but I mean, if you are served with one of them, you're pretty much toast, aren't you? I mean, no Prime Minister could possibly survive being found of criminality for the very rules that Prime Minister set. You'd be finished if you got one.
Well, with deepest respect to you, Pete, I don't in any way wish to minimise the importance of the issue and your point, but I just want to return to what I've said, and that is that that would come under the category of running commentary in my view.
Getting away from the running commentary, you can at least accept that there has been criminality committed. Apparently your spokespersons just contradicted the assertions made by the Justice Secretary, your deputy, this morning, that there has been criminality. You do accept that criminality, 20 fixed penalty notices have been issued, for goodness sake. There can't be any contradiction in doubt that criminality.
So I've been, I hope, very frank with the House about where I think we've gone wrong, and the things that I regret, that I apologise for. But there is an ongoing investigation, and I understand the point you're making, Pete. But I'm going to, camp pretty firmly on my position.
I'm not saying anything
which
about
is
this at all, or answer any questions.
No, I understand that, and look, I understand why you have to ask it, and it's quite right that you do. But I've been very clear. I won't give running commentary on an ongoing investigation.
Can we maybe go over some of the things that you have said to us, which we do understand, which is a matter of record, and you can maybe help clarify some of them, because some of it I find very difficult to understand. Because first you said there was no rule breaking. That was right, yeah. Then you claimed you weren't aware of any of these parties. Then you said it was a work meeting. Then you said you were outraged by them. Then you said you were aware of these events, but they weren't against the rules. And finally, you admitted you were at these events, but you were so ignorant of the rules, you didn't realise you were breaking them. You do understand why the public has such difficulty with all this?
Yeah, of course, Pete. But and I don't want to. And I understand why you're asking the questions, but I just want to repeat that there will come a point when I will be able to talk about the investigation and the conclusions of the investigation, and that is when the investigation has concluded. And I've no doubt at all that I will be back before this committee, back before the House of Commons, to talk about it. But at the moment, it's still going on.
And if it has been found that you did break the ministerial code, which, looking at all the things you've said and all the things that have transpired, it's almost pretty crystal clear that you did, that will mean a resignation issue for you.
With great respect, Pete, I think you're just going to have to hold your horses and wait until the conclusion of the investigation, when there will be a lot more clarity, and I will be back before this committee, and I've no doubt back before the body of the House of Commons, and I'll be only too happy to elucidate you further.
You realise how frustrated and disappointed the public will be with these responses from you today? They expect some sort of answers. I mean, just talk about your leadership in number 10. I mean, I was in rock and roll for 15 years. I mean, I could never even start to compete and keep up with activities number 10 under lockdown and the partying culture that you created. Who's responsible for all of this?
You see, that is, I hear you, Pete, but if I may say so, that that is a very good illustration. Your question is a very good illustration of why it is important that we should wait to the conclusion of the investigation.
I think you famously sang, talking on the rock and roll theme, that I will survive. Are you still going to survive? It's not looking good, is it?
If I just respectfully say,
we could maybe have a duet after this.
Yeah, we're always too. Only too happy to have a drink with my friends from the SMP. But look, this is not something I can say much more about right now.
You thought you'd got away with it, didn't you? You really thought that this was going to be put aside and nobody would be interested. You've been a bit shocked in the course of the past 24 hours, and you got optics last night of parading your MPs in front of the COVID bereaved to go and party the day that you received fixed penalty notices was surely dreadful optics.
Pete, there will be a time for me to talk to you at length. I mean, that's your view. You're entitled to your characterisation of events that you can have no. I wish to engage with you in dispute about how you choose to see things. That's not the way I see things. But where I think you and I are certainly in agreement is that it would be right for me to come back before this committee, and when the investigation is concluded, and to set out what I think, and to be properly interrogated about the findings of the investigators. But that has not happened yet. The thing isn't over, and any such discussion is, in my view, premature.
Right, we'll move on now.
My best, yeah. You did, I've done my best too, but there is literally not a lot more I can say.
Right. Okay, Catherine McKinnon.
Thank you, Chair. I've listened very carefully to this exchange in relation to the Downing Street lockdown parties. Lack of trust in government is raised regularly in parliamentary petitions. So, Prime Minister, how would you respond to 130,000 plus petitioners who are calling for lying in the Commons to be made a criminal offence?
I think that it's very important that you should be clear with the House of Commons, and I've tried to be as clear as I can about my understanding of events. I've been back repeatedly to before the Commons to explain, to apologise for the things that I think we've got wrong, and I've no doubt that I'll be back again. But you know, there's not a lot more I can say at the present time.
I mean, very much the words that you use, I've tried to be as clear as I can, and I think that's the big concern that people have, is that you're not able to be clear or straight on these issues. If you can't even answer the question as to whether any laws were broken in Whitehall during lockdown when 20 fixed penalty notices were issued yesterday. Can you at least give a clear answer on that?
Well, you say 20 fixed penalty notices were issued yesterday. I'm not certain of that, but you may know something that I don't, and that's one of the reasons why I think it'd be really quite sensible of us all just to wait until the investigation is concluded.
Okay, and just one further point that I want to put. Can you appreciate, Prime Minister, that throwing a party for Tory MPs on the anniversary of the COVID memorial, on the day that some fixed penalty notices were issued for lockdown breaking in Whitehall, might give the impression to the public that you don't care about how they feel about this?
I think that this government has done everything we can to protect the public throughout the pandemic, and I asked specifically, do you care about the public's perception? And yes, I care deeply, but we have worked incredibly hard across the whole of government to look after the population during the pandemic. Some things went well, some things went less well. It was an incredibly difficult time, but I think overall the record of the UK government in dealing with COVID has been pretty remarkable, and I am proud of it.
Okay. Prime Minister, just to make clear before we move on to Ukraine, you say that you'll be able to answer questions when the investigation is finished. Is that when the Met Police say we have now investigated and finished our investigations?
Yes, because it's only at that stage, right. Ms. Betts, that we will be able to conclude the Sue Gray process, and that's when we'll be able to wrap the whole thing up. And that, I mean, genuinely, I think is the sensible moment for us to have a discussion.
So it's the Met Police finishing is the time. Okay, that's fine. Moving on to Ukraine now. Tom Tugendhat as Chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee.
Thank you. It's good to see you. Has President Macron been speaking to Putin for too long?
I think it's, Tom, I think it's very, very important that the unity of the West and the unity of NATO should be remembered and prioritised, and that's what we're doing. I think the question of negotiation with Vladimir Putin, the value of those negotiations is an open one. My own view is that Putin is plainly not to be trusted. I think the most important thing, and here I think Emmanuel and I would be in total agreement, the most important thing is that whatever happens should be what the Ukrainians want. And it's for them to decide what their future should be. That is what is at stake here. It's not for any of us, whatever we may think, to try to create a future for them. It's for them to decide their future.
So do you agree with President Biden that the end state should be not only Russians out of Ukraine, but Putin gone from the Kremlin?
Look, I understand why Joe Biden said that, and I understand there are frustrations that people feel about Putin, and to desire a change of government in itself is not an ignoble thing. I think there are probably plenty of people around this horseshoe, Pete perhaps, who would like to change in this government. But that's the objective of a lot of democratic politics. But let's be absolutely clear, it's not the objective of the UK government. And it's very, very important that everybody gets this. We are simply setting out to help to protect the people of Ukraine and to protect them against absolutely barbaric and unreasonable violence. That's what we're doing. And I think that it's vital to keep that. There were 141 votes, Tom, in the UN General Assembly against what Russia had done. And that was a fantastic thing. And there was, as you know, there was a more recent vote which almost kept the number. You've got to keep this simple.
And so, given the efforts is to protect the Ukrainian people, I think something that we'd all welcome. What did you think of the Franco-Turkish-Greek attempt at humanitarian aid?
You mean for Mariupol?
Yes.
I think that I'm obviously in favour of humanitarian aid, but Tom, you and I remember this ruthless cynicism with which Putin manipulates so-called humanitarian aid corridors in order to throw his opposition off balance. You remember what he did in Aleppo, the constant dangling of peace processes and humanitarian corridors, when really what he wants to go on and do is administer extreme violence. And again, I think it's a good thing to be humanitarian. It's good to help people, to help refugees. But I have my doubts about the genuine willingness of Putin to cooperate.
Do you think, however, there's more that we could do for civil defence? I mean, there are various avenues that we could assist with. The Ukrainian government itself has asked for example, armoured Land Rovers assistance in, if you like, white helmets type units within Ukraine. Is that something that you're already looking at?
We're certainly looking at going up a gear now in our support for the Ukrainians as they defend themselves.
This is civilian assistance rather than military assistance, if you like.
Right. In Mariupol, the issue is, as you know, that the Ukrainian defenders are now pretty much encircled, and there's a humanitarian catastrophe. The question is, can we help the Ukrainians relieve Mariupol, if that were possible? Would armour, would APCs be useful for them? You mentioned armoured Land Rovers.
Armoured ambulances.
We're certainly looking at that. But, I'm afraid it depends very much on the environment that Putin's forces are willing to allow.
Prime Minister, I understand that. I'm actually more looking at the civilian assistance that could go into...
The white helmets?
A white helmets type arrangement. So armoured ambulances to help, for example, around Kiev, around the Dnieper River, areas where the Ukrainians are suffering not just from casualties from the artillery, but then the aid units that go in and assist the injured are being targeted by Russian units. And in those areas, armoured ambulances could help, possibly some extra logistical supplies in terms of body armour and so on for medical units. Is that something you're looking
It's
at?
a very, very interesting suggestion, Tom. I mean, it's not something that Volodymyr Zelensky has requested so far from me personally, but that doesn't mean that the Ukrainians haven't reached out and asked for it through other channels. He's asked for a lot of different things so far, but not that. I'm certainly keen.
Let me just repeat then a request from some of the Ukrainian MPs. They have asked for it, so I'll pass that in through your system to make sure it's gone in. The question really is also, when are we going to lift sanctions? Because presumably if there's stick, there also must be carrot. At what stage do you think that sanctions could be lifted on Russia? Does it have to be Ukraine whole and entire, including Crimea? Does it have to be the liberation as well of the occupied areas of Georgia? What is the line that you are thinking about?
I certainly don't think that you could expect the G7 to lift sanctions simply because there's been a ceasefire in Ukraine. And that, again, goes straight into Putin's playbook. In my view, we should continue to intensify sanctions with a rolling program until every single one of his troops is out of Ukraine.
Including Crimea.
And, as I said, every single one of his troops is out of Ukraine.
Would you include Georgia? That's been occupied now, as you know, since 2008. South Ossetia and Abkhazia.
I think that we need to have a total rethink about all the support that we offer countries such as Georgia and Ukraine. And what we're evolving towards is, I think, a new way of looking at Ukraine. So if and other countries, former countries in the former CIS or former Soviet Union, and I think because of the sheer quantity of a NATO-compatible materiel and the weapons that we're now supplying, we're changing the dynamic, and we're changing the security architecture of the situation bit by bit. And there's going to come a point when I think we should recognise that this has happened, and that we are now I hope that we will be in a position with willing partners to offer not an Article 5 security guarantee to Ukraine, but a different kind of future, a different kind of commitment based on the idea of deterrence by denial, so that Ukraine is so fortified and so protected with weaponry. The quills of the porcupine have become so stiffened that it is ever after indigestible to Putin, and that is the path that we are now on. And I think that's a very productive way of thinking now about something that has been a problem we haven't been able to solve, which is the homelessness of Ukraine and other countries in Europe's security architecture.
May I just build on that, because your point is very welcome. The point you're making is very focused on Putin. You'd also recognise, I'm sure, that Putin is not Russia. He's just stolen it. The reality is that there is a criminal conspiracy that calls itself a government sitting in the Kremlin today, centred on a single individual. But there are opposition voices. We know, for example, of Alexei Navalny. We know about Vladimir Kara-Murza. We know of Michael Khodorkovsky and indeed Garry Kasparov. There are prominent Russian voices who have voiced a possible different future for the Russian people, and one that I suspect is rather more popular to the Russian people than the current system of vassalage that they live under. Would the UK government consider offering support and assistance to them and making sure that independent democratic voices have a way in? And would that include things like making sure that virtual private networks for the internet are freely available to Russian citizens who currently find it very difficult to buy them because, of course, the economic sanctions are effectively assisting Vladimir Putin's censorship?
Yeah, we see all sorts of possible futures for Russia, but to get back to the first point I wanted to make in answer to your first question, we've got to keep it simple. Keep this one simple. This is I've never seen a clearer case of right and wrong. This is about the flagrant violation of international law, the invasion of a totally innocent country, and it's about helping the Ukrainians to protect themselves. Now that is something that unites the whole the House of Commons, and I hope, and it certainly unites a large number of countries around the world. And I think if we stick to that, we won't go wrong. because I think that the consequences, the logical consequences, politically, militarily, will speak for themselves, and I'm sure you'll have thought it all through. But when it comes to supporting wider civic society in Russia, supporting a free media, free internet, we do a lot of that already. I think that we've just put another £4.1 million into supporting BBC Ukrainian and Russian services to help people get at the truth, and we're doing a lot more to promote proper understanding of what's going on.
Prime Minister, Tobias Ellwood, as you know, is not in the country at the moment. He's in Warsaw, and he's asked me to ask on his behalf about the integrated review, which rightly spells out looming European security threats, but not the timeline. And he highlights the cuts to the RAF's F-35s, Typhoon and Hercules fleets, to the Army's tank and armoured fighting vehicle numbers, and the 10,000 reduction in troop sizes to the lowest number now since before the Napoleonic Wars. In this new era of insecurity, are you going to reconsider those numbers? And are you going to request the National Security Council to produce an updated assessment on the long-term strategic threat picture with recommendations on how gaps in our capabilities can be filled?
I think if you look at the integrated review, it was actually pretty much spot on in the priorities that it set out for the country. And in particular, it said that the Euro-Atlantic area was the number one issue of concern when it comes to the choice between high-tech and heavy armour. And Tobias and I had this conversation here. Actually, I think that the advantages of high-tech in helping the Ukrainians are pretty manifest now. And I think that the effectiveness of the NLAWs, of Starstreak, of Javelin, of a lot of the systems that we're now using, Switchblade. These are the things that are the UAVs, the TB2 drones that the Turks have been supplying. These are the game changers, and so I think it was right for us to go for this massive increase in expenditure, as we did with the Defence Review, 10% increase. But it was also right for us to focus on real value for the UK and make sure we could maximise our ability to project force overseas, and that's what the integrated review gives.
Thank you, Prime Minister.
Okay, moving on now to look at the humanitarian issues that involved Sarah Champion.
Thank you. Hello again, Prime Minister. I'm very grateful that the UK has committed 400 million to humanitarian support for Ukraine, but I wrote to you on the 9th of March asking for details on whether or not this money has actually got to the people that it's intended for, and I haven't had a reply. So could I ask you now some specifics? How much of the UK's pledged financial contributions have reached organisations supporting communities in Ukraine? How much has reached international agencies? How much has reached local organisations, local NGOs, mayors and councils?
Right. So, Sarah, I'm going to have to.
Right to be.
I'm so sorry. I will. I mean, the number's high. We've given at least 400 million.
You've pledged 400 million.
Correct.
I haven't seen the evidence.
I will be very happy to share where it's going. We have, as you know, lots of visa application centres in the region. We're doing lots to help with the reception of refugees. But how much has gone to each mayoralty in Szczecin and Warsaw and exactly how it's being divvied up? I will really have to get back to you.
I would be really grateful if you could, Prime Minister. You mentioned earlier humanitarian corridors and how they're being flagrantly exploited. I mean, they're necessary both to get people out but also to get aid in. So have you considered doing something as happened in northeast Syria with the UN Security Council resolutions to try and keep these passages open for the safety of everyone?
Yes, I mean that's in essence what we're looking at. The difficulty is that the Russians are very adept at manipulating the humanitarian corridors and negotiations to regroup, deal with other objectives, and then come back and do it again. I remember sitting around many negotiating tables talking about Aleppo and what we were doing to help people out of Aleppo, what assurances Putin could give, and it was in the end turned out to be more or less completely valueless. They pulverised Aleppo.
So
they
are
didn't
there other
stop.
options that you're considering? Are there other options you're considering to try and keep those corridors open?
Well, I mentioned one to Tom. So we're thinking about is there anything we could do to help actually relieve Mariupol, which would be a great thing to that is going to be very, very tough. And don't forget, Mariupol is an extraordinary place, and it's fallen before to Russia and then been retaken by Ukraine. So what's happening is absolutely tragic. If we could think of an easy solution, we'd do it. But we are, as everybody knows, heavily constrained.
Prime Minister, I've also written to you about the mine clearance that needs to happen and the British charities that are really central to achieving that. Again, if I could get a response to that, because the horror that's going on at the moment, it might only be small things we can do, but if we do all of them, hopefully we can make it a little better.
You're so right, Sarah, and you're so right. And I don't know whether you've heard this, whether the committee, but as the Ukrainians push back Russian forces in some places, what we are hearing are absolutely horrifying tales of what the Russians have done while they're occupying.
I mean, you will have heard and been as equally horrified as I have around the countless examples of sexual violence being used as a weapon of war, and this seems a very systematic technique, if I use that term, that the Russians employ. We've got to end the apparent culture of impunity around this and show that there are going to be consequences. The UK has been a leading light on PSVI around the world, and I'm very proud of that. So what practical steps is the UK taking to prevent sexual violence and document those crimes? I mean, have we got PSVI people there on the ground? What support is being offered to NGOs for the victims and survivors?
Well, we have a PSVI, Preventing Sexual Violence in Conflict team working to support survivors, hold perpetrators to account for what's happening in Ukraine. I believe that they're in the surrounding area rather than in country itself, because so many of the victims are now outside Ukraine. And Sarah, I agree with you. It's something that the Foreign Office pioneered actually under William Hague and Baroness Hellig, who I think really got that on the international agenda and quite rightly. And the tales are appalling. But we have a team in the region and we're funding them very actively.
That's very reassuring. And my final question, I'm sure again you're aware of the unaccompanied children that are fleeing Ukraine. We've heard a lot of concerns about a large number of children from orphanages fleeing into Moldova, a country which, to be honest, is ill-equipped with safeguarding of its own children, let alone the influx from Ukraine. UNICEF reports that more than 500 unaccompanied children crossed from Ukraine to Moldova in the few weeks between the 24th of February and the 17th of March. What plans do you have in place to strengthen and increase the safeguarding systems in countries surrounding Ukraine? And do you have any plans that would enable children to come to the UK for safeguarding, for example, as we saw with the Dubs Amendment?
With the Dubs Amendment, yes, sorry. You're right in what you say about children. It's one of the horrifying aspects of the conflict that so many women and children have been coming out. What we want to do is, wherever possible, to ensure the children are united with their families, and that's clearly in the best interests of the child. Before bringing them as you asks to this country, we are seeing what we can do with NGOs to make sure that they get all the safeguarding and help that they need. But it's it's a very difficult problem. But before we go to a dub-style solution, I think we need to think about whether, then the needs of those kids are probably going to be best met if we can keep them in the area and get them back to their families.
I agree. Thank you. Thank you.
Moving on to Julian now. Yeah, Julian.
Prime Minister.
Julian.
Our recent committee session into Russian disinformation showed that there are growing doubts amongst the Russian population concerning Putin and his lie machine. Prime Minister, should we not seize this opportunity? We pledged 4 million, as you mentioned to Ms. Tugendhat earlier, to the World Service, but should we not look to fund a sustained information strategy in order to bring the truth to the Russian people about the crimes being committed in their names?
You're so right, and one of the depressing things is the ruthlessness with which Putin tries to conceal the reality of what's happening from the Russian population. And genuinely, you can ring and talk to Russian friends, and they will seriously dispute what is going on in Ukraine. They really, I'm afraid, people are very vulnerable to the lies that Putin is telling, and we have to be extremely energetic in exposing them. So we've got a government information cell that's been going for some time to counter disinformation. You can imagine the sorts of things, Julian, that it tries to do. But what we've been, our whole approach has been to try to be as frank with people as we possibly can about what we know, and kind of demystifying things. So it was the UK and the US that were out there in the beginning saying there is a massive problem. There are 100 battalion tactical groups on the borders with Ukraine. We know this, and we put it into the public domain. Similarly, when we got information about false flag operations, we immediately put it out into the public domain, trying to fight the disinformation with as much exposure of the reality as we can. I think it's starting to have an effect. I mean, I think you are seeing signs now in Russia of people waking up to what's going on.
And that's very much about their disinformation directed at us. And since 2013, the Russians have been very, very open, in fact, talking about the fact that part of their strategy is effectively to undermine the West. Should we not now turn the tables on them and all our news media organisations working together in order to get the truth into Russia by whatever means that we possibly can, and coordinating on a governmental level?
Yes, I mean, I think that's why we're as I said to Sarah, we're increasing funding for the BBC, and we're doing whatever we can to counteract the Putin narrative, and we are doing an awful lot to communicate to ordinary Russians what is really going on. And as I said, there are some signs that it's getting through. And this new movement with green ribbons and so on, I think there is a growing awareness of the reality of what's happening in Ukraine. But it is very, very far from universal in Russia, very far.
Russia Today and Sputnik have been blocked, but there is nothing stopping the Kremlin starting up a new media organisation via a social media platform almost in a heartbeat. To stop this happening, Prime Minister, do you think we need the clearest possible definition of what constitutes a recognised news publisher in the upcoming online safety bill?
Yes, and I know you've been following this like a lynx, the bloodhound or something. A news publisher needs to have a registered UK address, have a standards code, and have editorial control. And the online safety bill will force all such companies to tackle the content that is illegal in the scope of the legislation.
Not all such companies, though, because the reality is that banning Russia Today and Sputnik is of little importance, because the real disinformation is coming from Russia is emanating from platforms such as Telegram. As it stands, it looks highly likely that Telegram will not be considered as a high-risk, high-reach social media platform. And in order that Telegram, amongst others, face the strictest regulation under the online safety bill, should in the coming weeks the government outline precisely which specific companies will be in scope to be considered high risk?
As news publishers or as high risk?
As high risk. And do you think Telegram should be included as one of those high risk companies?
Well, look, I'm going to have to say that I think that we need to make sure that anybody putting stuff. My general feeling about it is anybody putting stuff online should in a systematic way, putting content online in a systematic way should be defined as a news publisher, and it should be subject to the controls that we've set out in the bill.
Yeah, my final question, Prime Minister, is partly a request, if you like. Despite no collective ministerial agreement and writing to my committee, ruling out such a move just 24 hours before, the Secretary of State for DCMS still seems intent on introducing a new committee which will effectively mirror the work of my committee looking at online safety. This Prime Minister would drive a coach and horses through the Select Committee system. Prime Minister, will you commit to investigate this matter, write to me on it, and protect the Select Committee system, which I know you value so much?
Well, I do, and I value your work, but I'm conscious that the committees are really a matter for the House. But I will certainly investigate the matter and write back to you.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Julian. Moving on now to the issue of visas, which is a very challenging one. Dame Dan Johnson.
Thank you, Clive, and good afternoon, Prime Minister. I wanted to ask you about the two main routes in terms of obtaining visas to come to the United Kingdom. And I wondered on reflection whether you thought that not going for an emergency humanitarian visa for those people fleeing war was the right decision, because the route that the government have taken around a family visa scheme, which is about controlling migration and not about dealing with a humanitarian crisis, as you know, has been beset with over bureaucratic provisions, caused confusion and has changed many times.
Well, of course I thought about having a system where we just open the doors and...
no, that's not what I said, Prime Minister. I said an
me.
emergency humanitarian visa. So you would still carry out the checks, you'd be able to take the biometrics at the border or before someone got onto a plane. That's what I'm talking about. I recognise you're concerned about security.
Okay, well thanks. Let me just clarify then. I wanted a system, I think we're probably not that far apart then, because what I wanted was a system that was as light touch as possible and would enable people to come here, but would enable us also to do checks, because we are outside the Schengen system. We have the advantage of being able to clarify people's status, their bona fides, and so on. That's not a bad thing if you want to have a program that really works and commands confidence. Now, so far, what it's meant is that we've had 25,000 visas approved. That's not a bad number so far. They're being handled at a rate of 1,000 a day. I mean, it's quite a sizable, and the numbers will mount now quickly. There's no cap on these numbers, don't forget.
Can I ask you then about the Homes for Ukrainians, which is the scheme that still requires a visa? It's a 39-page visa, or 30-page visa as far as I'm aware this morning from speaking to the Minister. But only 1 in 100 of the applications that have been submitted have actually resulted in a visa being issued. And you were asked at Prime Minister's Question Time today about how many of those, I think it's 2,700 who have been given visas, how many of those have actually arrived in the country?
Yes, I know, and I'm afraid I still don't have the number. I know that 2,700 have been given visas, but don't forget that these numbers are climbing, and the generosity of the British people is quite remarkable. I think almost 200,000 people have said they will take Ukrainians. There's no cap on the family reunion scheme. That's already the thick end of 25,000. That's a town. That's a pretty big town.
I totally agree with you, Prime Minister, about the generosity of the British people, but can I just put to you this case of a pregnant woman she's in Poland at the moment. She's heavily pregnant. She's been matched under the Homes for Ukrainians scheme. She's been told that she actually has to wait to give birth in Poland in temporary accommodation in order to obtain a birth certificate for the child, for then to be able to get a visa. Now, is that really what you think how the scheme should be operating, if we're so concerned to bring people over to this country as quickly as possible?
Well, I can't see any reason why she couldn't come here and have the baby here. But I'll be, if you'll write to me with the details, I'll be very happy to look into it.
And then can I just ask about safeguarding? This week, Michael Gove received a letter from 16 refugee and anti-slavery groups who were concerned about the Homes for Ukraine's scheme risked operating as Tinder for sex traffickers. What do you say about that?
I think that is one of the reasons why it's important to have, as light touch as possible, but to have DBS checks and to make and checks both ways. Make sure that we have a program that is really working, and I think that's important for the whole country, because everybody will want to be as generous as possible, but they'll also want to feel that the scheme is really sound, and we're getting the people that really need our help, and that we're helping them in the best possible way.
And do you think the National Crime Agency should be policing Facebook groups where people are putting their personal details? And I think there's one case of a man who said he was looking for a Ukrainian wife. Yeah. There are children who are posting on those Facebook groups to try and be matched with someone in the UK. Do you think the National Crime Agency has a role to play in that?
I think certainly, and I think that one of the things that I've become concerned about in the last couple of weeks is what's happening to refugees. They're overwhelmingly women and children in the region. Are they who is predating upon them? What's happening to them? I think we have to be very, very vigilant about that, and that's why I think the Homes for Ukrainian scheme has got to be something that we're very, very generous. We open our arms, but we also make sure that that scheme is not itself being abused. Not by the Ukrainians, but by people who maybe have bad motives.
I just wondered if you'd had an opportunity to raise with any of the social media organisations, and Facebook in particular, any of the concerns around this scheme and how it's operating by people being able to advertise and match through those mediums.
No, I haven't personally, but it's a very good point, and I'm sure that that Michael Gove and his teams are on it. But what we want, we're going to have a lot of Ukrainians, and that's going to be a great thing. It's going to be a great thing. They're fantastic people, and we're going to be very, very generous. But what we want is a scheme that really does command confidence amongst the British public, but also confidence amongst the Ukrainians.
On to a general issue about immigration. Bill Wiggin.
Thank you. 2,700 out of 28,300 in the last 15 days are the visas that have been issued. I happen to agree with everything you've said about how my constituents, the British people, your constituents, want Ukrainians to come to the UK and be properly looked after. Why is it that you think it's moving so slowly?
Well, we're processing about 1,000 a day.
Well, that's what we want to get to, isn't it?
And it is, already you've got, what's the population of Hereford, Bill?
140,000.
All right, okay. What's the population of the town of Hereford?
Well, the problem is that in 15 days we've only done 10% of the people who've applied, so we're nowhere near 1,000 a day. And my problem is that what you want is what I want, it's what the people want, but it doesn't appear to be what we're delivering. That's my concern. Why aren't you getting what you want, Prime Minister?
We're getting already sizable numbers, and I think that's a good thing. And I think it's don't forget, most Ukrainians already want to be in the region. They in an ideal world, they'd like to go back to their homes. A lot of them increasingly are now wanting to come to other European countries. They're wanting to come to the UK, and that's quite right. And we're opening our doors and opening our homes. The numbers are going up quite steeply now. I think they'll continue to rise for a while to come. I think that's going to be a great thing. This country has a very proud record of welcoming evacuees. I don't want to pointlessly to berate officialdom and blame people for being slow. That's too easy. I think we ask a lot of our officials and our public servants. They have to balance some quite difficult objectives. We've just been hearing some really good questions about modern slavery, about sexual trafficking, about children, about gangsters who might be trading in evacuees. You've got to be careful, and don't forget that the point I made on the first day in the House is that there will also be people coming from that war zone who may not be entirely who they say they are, and we've had some cases, sadly, of that already.
Okay, take you to the complete other end of the spectrum. We have on at least 3 occasions promised the Qataris visa-free access. These are very wealthy people who are unlikely to stay, and yet, despite saying we do it 3 times, we still haven't delivered. And I'm really worried, Prime Minister, that everything you've said to us today, I actually want to happen, but it isn't happening. And the only people who are turn up in rubber boats. Why can't we get the right people through our immigration system instead of the wrong ones?
Well, so if I understand you correctly, Bill, what you're saying is why can't the Qataris and other Gulf countries have visa-free access?
Well, we want Ukrainians, we want Qataris, and we don't want people in rubber boats.
No, well,
we're not getting it.
No, sure. So the Nationalities and Borders Bill, coupled with a few other things, will help us, I think, to do a great deal to stop the cruel trade in people across the Channel. When we will do our best to deal with that, but that's a separate issue from the visas for Qataris and others. I am keen to have a more fluid, much more fluid system for Qatar, and we are keeping our system under constant review, and I recently had the good fortune to tell the Emir of Qatar that we were likely to see progress very soon, but I don't want to go beyond that. It seemed, when you this is one of the things that frankly could go a bit faster.
Well, you were very, very generous in your protection of the civil service a few moments ago. Will you have a very close look at the people who are not moving at the speed at which you'd like? Because you wanted a light touch system, you want that security, you want all the right things, and the country wants those same things too. What can you do to make sure that your wish becomes your command, or vice versa? Because we want more of that.
Yeah. So what you can do is make sure that you increase the number of visa application centres in country, so that you put everything online, so that people can get their application cleared digitally and then come here, and that's what we're doing. And you have to pay to send more officials out to Poland, to Romania, to Slovakia, to everywhere that's currently receiving refugees, and make sure that they're able to process as many as possible. You have to increase our ability to help people at Lille, at Calais, and everywhere, and that's what we're doing.
Excellent. So we can look forward to the right people arriving in the next coming days.
I can assure the committee that we are going to see, and thankfully, praise be, we're going to see a lot of wonderful Ukrainians coming, and I also think, Bill, to cheer you up even more, we're going to see some pretty fluid toing and froing by our friends in the Gulf.
Could we just move on, Prime Minister, to the two schemes, the sponsorship scheme and the family scheme for Ukrainian refugees? The Home Affairs Select Committee was told 2 weeks ago that local authorities will get £10,500 for each refugee that came through the sponsorship scheme, and they will get the same funding for refugees under the family scheme. This morning, the Levelling Up Select Committee were told that wasn't true, and there wouldn't be any funding for local authorities for refugees that came under the family scheme, even though refugees coming under that scheme will still need the same wraparound support, almost entirely, that refugees under the sponsorship scheme will get. Can we have a look at that? Because clearly local councils are under financial pressures, and it just doesn't seem fair to them to say, over to you, it's all yours, no help.
Yes, so thanks, Clive. You're right about the distinction, and so the family, the Homes for Ukrainian scheme attracts support of £10,500 per person per year for the council, £8,755 per child for education, plus of course the £350 per month to the recipient home. The broader category, the initial category, the family reunion scheme.
There we go. That is the Prime Minister in front of MPs for the last hour or so in Parliament, talking about everything from the cost of living crisis to the war with Ukraine, as you can see, but also on Partygate. He would not be drawn really on that, refusing essentially to answer questions. So he's not going to provide a running commentary on that until the police have reported back. On Ukraine, though, he said that Putin plainly cannot be trusted, and the UK was looking to gear up on military support, including potentially armoured vehicles, and that sanctions could be intensified, he said, until every Russian troop is out of Ukraine, including Crimea. So that's the Prime Minister. We'll keep across that, bring you the lines as they come in. That is it from me for today. I'm back again tomorrow at 3. Up next, it's Colin. That's after the weather.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Hard to believe this time last week it was 20 degrees in the north of Scotland. Now we've got lying snow. Rain and snow is moving south across the country, turning things colder from the north. And there'll be further snow showers to come across parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland into northern England during the rest of the day. But this is the feature of note. This is bringing Arctic air to the northern half of the UK during the rest of the day, and then that air sinks south overnight with rain initially turning perhaps to sleet and snow, with any snow mainly settling over hills, so the Chilterns, the North and South Downs for example, but could see some slight accumulations of slushy snow on grassy surfaces first thing in the southeast on Thursday. A cold start with icy patches for northern and eastern Scotland, northeast England as well. Further snow flurries coming in here during Thursday. Once we see the back of any rain, sleet and snow in the far southeast, it does brighten up, but there'll be further showers, and there'll be a biting northeasterly wind across the country. That'll make it feel even colder than these temperatures would suggest. The wind at its strongest in the far southeast. Nevertheless, despite the cold feel, there will be some sunshine out there, the best of which will be towards the west. And if you're in the north, actually a decent chance of seeing the aurora on Thursday night. Excellent viewing conditions and a strong chance of that aurora happening. Widespread clear skies, a few more wintry showers into the east of England, northwest Scotland as well. But away from those, a widespread frost for the start of Friday, temperatures well below freezing in the countryside and where we've got any snow cover over the hills in the northern part of the UK. But plenty of sunshine first thing Friday, further showers into the east and the far northwest, but less windy, so perhaps not feeling quite as bitter. Into the weekend, things dry up a little and warm up.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
Make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Just gone 4 o'clock.